Join me in venturing on our first side quest here in the Final Fantasy Platinum series. We are starting off with my favorite side Final Fantasy game of all time. That can change because we are going to be visiting many side games on this journey, getting the Platinum trophy and talking about it. But for right now, my favorite is Crisis Core Reunion Final Fantasy VII. And a quick note, I did do a review on release for Crisis Core Reunion, but I was under the restrictions of embargo, so we are going to be following the same lines of that video, but obviously the kind of cap is off and we can just talk to our heart's content. So I hope you can join me in this venture. With that all being said, what is up guys, Jen here, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. We are going to be talking all things Crisis Core Reunion today, but as always I've got you covered with timestamps in the description, so if you want to skip to a certain section, feel free, whatever floats your boat. All I ask is for you to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you like the content, hit the notification bell if you want to be notified of that content, and of course get involved in that comment section down below. So let's just dive straight into my history of Crisis Core. And you know, I am a massive fan of Final Fantasy VII, as you are all probably aware if you watched my Final Fantasy VII video on the Platinum series. This is what got me into RPGs and Final Fantasy as a whole, so I am hooked into that world and I was welcoming anything. And we came across a thing called the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. Some good things, some not so good things, but overall such a great addition for a fan like me. And one of the things that was under that umbrella was a little game called Crisis Core for the PlayStation Portable. This blew my mind at the time because I was used to my little chibi characters going through pre-rendered backgrounds, and as I was seeing trailers for this, you were talking about something I was holding in my hand, and before that I was playing things on the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy before that. So playing a Final Fantasy VII game that would look better than the original Final Fantasy VII in my two hands, I was sold completely. This was absolutely crazy at the time and it was so exciting to get into. I spent endless nights grinding through all of those missions and just having a good time and enjoying the story of Zack. So usually we would talk about the evolution of Final Fantasy at this stage, but this is a side game, so we need to talk about the differences from 7, and I mentioned a few. We don't have the pre-rendered backgrounds, we don't have the chibi models, we have lifelike models, we have an amazing CGI looking cutscenes, we have a combat system that is very different to turn-based. It's more action-based, but still has that kind of command kind of thing to it, and overall we are looking at Midgar, in particular the world of Gaia in Final Fantasy VII, in a completely new and different way. Moving swiftly to the story of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, and you know, this is kind of concentrated on a side character that we thought at the time, though he had quite major implications on the overall story of Final Fantasy VII, but that was Zack, and he literally had a few scenes his name was mentioned because obviously Cloud had his identity crisis, thinking that he was living through Zack. So we get to experience that story through and through, not just the Nibelheim incident, but everything before that and everything after that, which was amazing because this game made me fall in love with Zack, and he is up at the top my list of Final Fantasy characters. If we ever do a tier list of Final Fantasy characters, spoiler alert, he will be there in S. But it was a great time to experience this story and certain scenes in a brand new way. Get introduced to familiar characters like Cloud, Sephiroth, the Turks, but at the same time get introduced to new characters like Angeal, Cissnei, and Genesis. So we had so much here, and at the time on that PSP, it was such a good story to get yourself invested in. Now, just to note, I am talking at the moment from a PSP perspective. We will get into the reunion changes just a little bit later, but we're going to move on to the world of Crisis Core and talk about the exploration. Obviously, this isn't set camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds. We get to revisit Midgar and more areas around the world of Final Fantasy VII in full 3D. We get camera control, even though back in the day we just had the 2 buttons to kind of look around when we needed to. This was crazy, going into Aerith's church and having that look at that 3D model, going through the slums of Midgar, going through the Shinra building, having a look at like their little museum in 3D, interacting with these characters and just getting more backstory on this world was absolutely incredible. Though it may look limited now, there was so much that we could do when we were exploring Midgar and just enjoying stuff between the story beats. Though there may have not been deep elements, finding hidden treasure chests and hidden items and ultimate weapons, it definitely did what it needed to do for Crisis Core, and I thoroughly and still enjoy that kind of simple linearity of Crisis Core and just having a good time with that. So let's move on to the biggest change when playing through Crisis Core, and that is the combat. Now, again, we're talking from the perspective of the PSP at the moment, and we kind of have that voice that we're all familiar with now if we have played Crisis Core, and that is activating combat mode. So whenever we are going through maps that may be related to story, when we're not kind of exploring through Midgar, or if we're going out on one of the many missions of Crisis Core, we are going through these areas and we are having random encounters, and instead of the whoosh, we are having activating combat mode. And it is a swift transition. There is no kind of like black screen fade outs or anything like that. We're straight into the action. But that combat was a lot to get used to at first, because obviously I dived into the turn-based genre after Final Fantasy VII. And going to Crisis Core, obviously I wanted to kind of just be invested in this game. So I accepted the battle system straight away. It was hard to get used to because we had to kind of scroll through all of our materia and our abilities using R and L on the PSP, because we only had, you know, just those 2 shoulder buttons to mess around with. We had one little analog stick, a nice crunchy D-pad, and obviously the triangle, square, X and circle buttons. So looking back, yes, very clunky, but at the time, you know, manageable and quite entertaining, to say so the least. There are a lot of things that are introduced in combat in Crisis Core that kind of help us along the way. One I want to get out the way straight away is the DMW. This has been improved upon in the Reunion version, but this was essentially a slot machine that was up in the corner. All of our battle that was related to story to a certain extent, but it was there, and if we kind of got certain combinations, we could level up, we could get a stat boost, we could get a stat decrease, we could use a summon, we could have a character moment or like a limit break, and you know, so random and out of control and not in our control. And looking back, yes, very frustrating, but again, very cool to kind of see some of those scenes for the first time as they are playing out. Can get annoying after it plays a few more times after that, but it was what it was, and it added to the combat. Another thing that was very important was the Materia System in Crisis Core, and this was not like the materia we had in Final Fantasy VII. It wasn't kind of finding combinations and, you know, making sure that we level them up, triple AP and all of that. This was simply just a system where not only did we get magic spells, we got certain attacks, we got certain kind of added abilities to our repertoire of skills, and it was fun to play around with. It was really fun when it came to the materia fusion in particular, because this is where we could break the materia to the ways we could only imagine. We could have so many attacks that we could add statistics to, because in the fusion you can add statistics. This is why you want to collect materia and collect items and just have a overall experimentation with it. But though nowadays you could probably find a guide to get exactly what you're after, but back then experimenting and having like an attack materia, like a skill, having that have such dirty damage attached to it was really satisfying and great to kind of go all through all those missions and handle those bosses with ease. It's such a good new look at the Materia System, and obviously the Materia System will forever evolve. We got a different kind of version of it in Remake, and I should imagine it's going to be expanded upon in Rebirth and then again in the third game, but it was nice to see what it did here in Crisis Core. I think we should talk about side content, and I kind of mentioned it briefly when we're talking about exploration, how the game is quite linear and open at the same time, especially for the time it came out. But there was a plethora of side content in Crisis Core. In each chapter of the game, there is something to do, and that will relate to kind of trophy talk that we do a little bit later. But there's always something to do in each chapter that's new and rewarding, whether it be opening a shop in the menu that you can go to, giving you a certain materia, or overall kind of boosting your kind of good time with Crisis Core. Of course, we've got to talk about the main piece of side content in Crisis Core, and that is the missions. The missions, there are 300 of these bad boys, and you're going to be spending quite a bit of time plowing through these. This is why using materia combinations and just getting that as OP as you can is important if you want to get through those missions faster. But there's so much kind of side stuff attached to that. There's always like a mission synopsis that's relating to the world, whether it's kind of like working for the Midgar Scientific Division in Shinra, or maybe it's the building division. There's always some kind of loose story attached to it, and a chain of side missions in particular that involve Yuffie, kind of really expand on her just a little bit, and is quite rewarding in the stuff you are, because you treasure hunting essentially. It's nice to have stuff added to it instead of it being not just mindless missions going through the same maps again and again. Yes, it can get quite tedious for a lot of people, but if you're determined to just get the best gear and even go against Minerva herself, you're going to be wanting to plow through those missions in Crisis Core. Now, I want to move on to music, but before we get there, I kind of want to go back to story, and it's very unusual for me to do this. But as I've been talking, I'm like, I really wish I talked about the story just a little bit more. And in particular, I just want to talk about Zack as a character, and how much I just adored him, and how much I appreciated him, and how much I am excited to see his role in Rebirth. Because, spoilers, Zack dies, and if you played the OG Final Fantasy VII, you already knew that was coming. But the way they managed to just capture that in Crisis Core and still make it emotional and make me kind of get the goosebumps kind of floating up my arm as the music's playing, and as Zack is passing Cloud, the Buster Sword, and, you know, he's dying. He is dying, and I am really sad about this. It is just such a moment in the Final Fantasy VII story, and that's why it perks my interest to see what's going to be happening in Rebirth. Because is he alive? Is he dead? Is he in the live stream? Is he dreaming? Is he in the afterlife? What the hell's going on? We don't really know. There's many theories, but experiencing his death in OG, that was just kind of like, oh, okay, that's what happened to him. But then experiencing it in Crisis Core and caring to the point where my heart falls in my stomach, caring, they did a really good job with writing Zack, and that can only carry on, right? Okay, let's talk about music, and we're going to kind of talk about the reunion soundtrack and the OG soundtrack as well, because I was excited for the music when playing Crisis Core, because I was like, am I going to hear some battle themes kind of redone? Am I going to hear the main theme of Final Fantasy VII? What am I going to hear, and how am I going to approach it? And this had a vast range of sounds in the soundtrack, from the dun dun doom 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 doom, and you know what I mean when I just kind of do that kind of guitar riff, because that's kind of some of the tracks that we got. It was such a kind of experimental soundtrack, but I dig it, and they did a phenomenal job kind of remastering it a little bit in the reunion soundtrack. Some of them I prefer the original, some of them I prefer the reunion, and some of them I prefer from OG Final Fantasy VII. But overall, the soundtrack is definitely worth a listen, and you can definitely get a good time out of it. And finally, we get to talk about the reunion changes. Of course, last year at the time of recording this video, we got Crisis Core Reunion. We were all wondering what's going to happen because they're releasing it after Remake. What are they going to do? Are they going to change the ending? They didn't change the ending. Hashtag spoilers. But what are all the other changes that we got? We got a great graphical kind of update. This was more akin to it looking like Final Fantasy VII Remake. These graphics were phenomenal, and it was more than just a remaster. And I think that's the tagline they used, because it really was. They used a lot of assets from Remake, but they went in and did everything. They changed everything, and they used a few things from Remake here and there, whether that be an enemy model or a piece of texture around Midgar. They went above and beyond to make this look fantastic, and I don't really have much of a bad thing to say about it. A thing that people may have a bad thing to say about is the change in voice acting, in particular our main character Zack. I didn't mind it whatsoever. I think Caleb Pierce is doing a fantastic job as Zack. It was nice to see all of the Remake cast reprise their roles in Crisis Core. I know that the Crisis Core script is very kind of mid-2000-ish and very cheesy at best, but they did with the lines that they had. We had Me Gongaga, we had all of the odd lines here and there that Crisis Core was known for, and I can't fault the voice cast whatsoever. They did the job that they were given. I like Zack. Again, I'll reiterate it, Caleb Pierce is doing a great job with Zack, and I'm very interested to see what he does in Rebirth when it comes to all the trials and tribulations we may come across in that game. But overall, I'm happy with the changes that they did. Again, going back to the graphics, we're talking about the UI. This again was to make it look very akin to what Remake looked, and it's a seamless transition. If you're playing Remake for the first time and you go to Crisis Core Reunion, you are kind of going to feel like this is part of that franchise, because they did a good job. It looks slick, it looks sleek, it looks beautiful. No complaints from me when it comes to the UI. And now we get to talk about the combat and the changes it brought to it. I did talk about having to kind of press L1 and R1 and not having really control over the camera. Now we have a PlayStation 5 controller, or PlayStation 4, whatever controller you are using. We got dual analog sticks and 4 shoulder buttons to mess around with. So we've got a repertoire of things to kind of, add on. And they did that, and they made combat a lot more fluid, a lot more feeling like Remake. You've got like a 3 kind of burst combo. You've got a shortcut menu in the Materia you've got equipped, and it overall is much better, if not amazingly better, than what we got in the PSP version of Crisis Core. There are a lot more quality of life updates that we got in Crisis Core Reunion, and I could list them all. Some of them are minor, some of them are a little bit bigger, but the one I just want to kind of talk about before we wrap up and talk about the trophies of Crisis Core Reunion is the DMW, the Digital Mind Wave. I did mention how random it was back in the OG version on the PSP. It's pretty still random in this version, but we have a little bit of control over it. We get to choose when we activate it, and that is about it. But it's less frustrating having, I don't know, maybe it go off 10 times in a long, grindy battle. So, each to our own, really, when it comes to stuff like that. But now we get to talk about the trophies of Crisis Core Reunion. Of course, you can see them scrolling on your screen right now. I did platinum this before the game was released, and overall, it's not a bad trophy list whatsoever. It's actually quite good, because it incentivized you to kind of do everything that Crisis Core has to offer. Yes, you can get through the story in just a matter of hours, but if you go out on each chapter and kind of expand yourself, talk to all the NPCs, because they are all voiced now. That's something I should have mentioned in the Reunion changes, but we have a nice trophy list that just requires you to do all of the side stuff, whether that's make Aerith's carts, whether that's to do the 7 Wonders of Nibelheim, or kind of talk to all of the NPCs and their kind of clubs for Genesis, Angeal, Sephiroth, and everyone else in between. It's a really nice trophy list in that regards. And then we have the generic ones going through each chapter of the game, beating the super boss of Crisis Core, which is Minerva, completing the game on hard mode, and a few other extras here and there. I don't think you'd have too much trouble with the Crisis Core Reunion trophy list, but there may be a few things in there that you might have difficulties with. But if you dive in and really explore the Materia System and Fusion, you shouldn't have a bad time with it whatsoever. And there we have it. We have spoken everything Crisis Core and Crisis Core Reunion. Again, it's a nice little side quest for us all. I'm hoping to do more as we go along, but I thought this was an easier one to do since I've already completed it. I did dive back in and just kind of get you know, a more of a recent kind of hands-on with Crisis Core, so I dove in, captured some footage that you've seen throughout this video, and you know, it still holds up and it is a very good game. And if you are a fan of Final Fantasy VII, why haven't you not played it yet? It's available on all systems now, which is great. It was locked to the PSP for the longest time, and the only way you could play it is if you owned the original or if you wanted to, you know, emulate it. So it's nice to have it officially accessible everywhere. And yeah, overall, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. And until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.